Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Kaihan Krippendorff here with us today. Kaihan is an internationally renowned thought leader, consultant, and sought-after keynote speaker on the topics of strategy, growth, and transformation. Recognized by Thinkers 50 as one of the top innovation thought leaders in the world, and ranked by global gurus as among the top 20 management professionals of 2023, Kaihan has a unique ability to turn difficult concepts into easy to understand ideas and practical tools. He holds degrees from the University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering, Wharton, Columbia, and London Business Schools, and a doctorate in strategy. He is also the best-selling author of 5 books and a 2-time TEDx speaker. And to date, his work has generated over $2.5 billion in new annual revenue from many of the world's most recognizable companies, including JP Morgan, Chase, L'Oreal, Microsoft, Raytheon, Yahoo, and the list goes on and on. And Kaihan, it is such a delight and an honor to have you here with us today. I have followed your work. I got to watch your TED Talks, and I'm particularly excited today to speak with you about kind of that way of innovation. I know one of your TED Talks is about that 4th option. But before we get to that, I just personally want to welcome you to the show and thank you for being here.
Oh, no, thank you. I always love our conversations. To get to do that in front of an audience is even, just a great experience. Thank you for having me.
So many people listening, have heard, of course, of different strategies for innovation. And I love your approach to this because it really is very innovative, very unique, and it's so simple. So would you be willing to start us off by just sharing a little bit about what is that 4th option that you speak about?
Yeah, so the 4th option is a term that I coined, and people, it became really sticky. Like whenever I give a speech, they remember this term, 4th option. I think it's helpful. I believe, and this isn't my quote, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So, so this concept is not like this kind of framework is not the truth, right? We know that's just language, but it's useful language, and it's a metaphor. It says there's a point at which others stop thinking. That's represented by 3. And why 3? It's sort of a magic number. It feels complete, right? In Christianity, you have the Holy Trinity. Great orators repeat in 3s. When I was a consultant at McKinsey, they trained me to break everything down into 3s and 3 sets of 3s and 3 sets of 3s. So that number 3 is like represents the point where you're like, okay, I've thought about all my options, and those could be options about whom I'm going to marry, where I'm going to move to, what school I'm going to go to, what should my pricing strategy be, how should I distribute this product, anything. And so what I believe great innovators do is they recognize where people have stopped thinking, right? When they say, oh, I've been in this industry for 30 years, and what you need to do is A, B, C, or I've solved this problem before, we have to do is 1, 2, 3. It may be that the collective wisdom they've gathered through their years have landed them in the ultimate best solution. There's never a better solution. It might be, but it also means they've stopped looking for new options. And so the 4th option just represents that point where you say, okay, we have those 3 options, but what is the 4th option? Now, the 4th, it could be 4, could be 5, could be 10. Usually when we do our work, it's usually like 150, 200 options, but it just says, look beyond what you think is the complete set of options. If that makes sense.
It does. And it really is a cool way to just consider what else might be possible, right? To keep asking ourselves that question, not to stop, at the kind of ones that are at the surface, right? The low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
Or yeah, and also you've talked about this in your podcast, like when we act automatically, remotely, without thinking, when we are just sort of in a known pattern of behavior, and many industries operate that way. There's just assumptions about the way things are done. Yeah. So it's almost like being asleep and then saying, hey, wait a second, I'm asleep, whether that's Southwest Airlines deciding that they're not going to do the hub and spoke model, but go to the point-to-point model, whether that's Sam Walton saying, hey, I'm not going to build in the cities, because Sears and was born at the same time as Walmart, but they and other retailers wanted to build in the cities. And Sam Walton said, no, if they're going to build in the cities, I'm going to build, outside. Or Michael Dell was the first to say, I'm going to sell computers directly to consumers. So there's a consensus, right? And we know, like, the limiting beliefs that keep people from trying something new. Typically, I'm not capable, it's not possible, or what would other people think? That social pressure of what would other people think, when everyone's always built in the cities, and what will they think if I decide to build in these rural areas? That pressure can not only prevent us from seeing and choosing those options, but actually prevent us from even seeing those options.
Yeah. And it's such kind of a cool thing to think about in terms of, like, what would they think? Because if they would think, right, wow, what a cool idea, it's new and different, I'm going to hop on that ship, right? Obviously, there's less risk. But if they might think, or at least our perception, our story is that they might think this is not going to work, this is not going to be good for me or my business, then, again, it might be a riskier option. And I think at the heart of this is fear, because I think to even be able to access the fourth option, there is an element of willingness to step into the unknown, to take some risks. And naturally, with risks comes some fears, because we don't know how the fourth option is going to turn out, because it is new. It's an innovative approach. And so for those people listening now that are waking up or have already woken up to the idea that there is another way for them to run their business, to innovate, and perhaps they need to, maybe the market is dictating that they must do that right away, so there's some pressure. What can they do to begin to access some new innovative ideas?
Yeah. So I think I like what you said, that they realize they might have to. That's one way to get people to think of a fourth option. And I think COVID, of all the terrible things that it caused, one thing that it did is it robbed many people of the three options. I can't meet in the office, I can't have coffee, and that forced us to try these fourth options that we were scared of, or we did think wouldn't work, or why we'll try it next year. And so that's one way. But generally, in my work, I think that there are 5 patterns of thinking. And I think of thinking actually as speaking, because when you're speaking, when you're thinking with other people, you're using language to think. And so I look at the language by which people think. And there's 5 different types of conversations that you want to have, that if you don't have those conversations when you're exploring options, that you reduce the probability of you finding a fourth option. The first is, it spells ideas. Again, all models wrong, some useful. I made it spell ideas, so it's hopefully easy to remember. You want some fourth option ideas. Imagine is stepping out into the future, working far out into the timeline and envisioning the future you want. That's imagine. Dissect is like breaking the problem down and realizing that we have a tendency to look at the obvious parts of the problem, but maybe there are other parts of the problem that if you solve them, you wouldn't have to wrestle with the parts of the problem that people are already solving. Whether that's like Elon Musk, you could say with Tesla, his idea was everyone's looking to create sustainable energy as a solution that works by looking at production of energy. And so he said, well, so let me look at use of energy, demand for energy. And a big part of demand for energy is the gasoline that we put in our cars. And if we can turn those cars into electric vehicles, we can democratize a market for electrical energy. And then, so he was looking where the people don't look. That's dissecting the problem and then saying supply, demand, everyone's looking supply, let's look at demand, or, any kind of system. Expand is about expanding your option set and generating lots of options. And there is a science to when you can create options. It has to do with, at the beginning of chess game, there are lots and lots of possibilities. At the end of the chess game, you can use logic, right? There are a few pieces on the board, but at the beginnings of games, logic doesn't help. And then analyze is about choosing the options. And that's where I think that social pressure often comes in, or that there's beliefs because the ideas that are fourth options will usually be inconsistent with prevailing logic and belief. And so there has to be a space for you to play with, to sit with, to dream about, not execute necessarily things that are that seem impossible because they're inconsistent with what you believe. And then there is sell, which is the enrolling other people in the fourth option. So those are like the 5 conversations that I think need to happen for you to increase your chances of finding a fourth option.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you made it as an acronym, right? Easier to access and remember to utilize. And my curiosity is particularly in the analyze part of the ideas, in the sense that to be able to analyze, especially when, as you said, we're essentially challenging long-held beliefs, assumptions, expectations for what works and what doesn't work, and what might work and might not work. And so what does one do as a leader if he or she wishes to analyze, challenge those ideas that were imagined, dissected, expanded, and so on, when the rest of the team does not see things their way? What can make it easier to invite people to suspend disbelief, if you will, and just play with some ideas?
Yeah. So if you would listen to I was listening to a radio program a few years ago, and it was a group of, I think they were just writers for a movie or something. And they were talking, and they're talking about a whole bunch of stuff that they didn't know if they were going to do it or not, if it was a good idea or not, but they had space to talk about it. So you could I want to do this one day, not one day, over a course of a year, is sit in a bunch of conversations and code. Are we having an imagine, dissect, expand, analyze, or sell conversation? I'll bet you that if you look in a corporate context, there's very little time to have an analyze conversation, because what we are after, the language that we use to classify an idea, is either it's a good idea or a bad idea. It'll work, it won't work. So there's no language to call an idea that maybe could work, but we don't know if it'll work. So what you can use, I use the word crazy idea, which is a difficult but potentially high impact idea. Some people don't like difficult, crazy ideas, so that they'll use bold ideas. You could use hypotheses, whatever language you want to use, but give a label for that idea, which is not an idea we're going to not do. It's not an idea we are going to do. It is an idea that we're going to explore if we could do it, right? And then if you could put that into your meeting agenda, right? Like every month you have your meeting, you could say, okay, we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about the crazy or hypotheses or bold ideas, right? And we're not talking about whether we're going to do them again. We're going to say, how could we do them, right? So there needs to be that space to discuss what impossible is defined by inconsistent with what we know how to do now. Now, we do that all the time in R&D, right? In the R&D department, they get to spend all this time on this is technically impossible. The reason it's technically impossible is because we don't know the technique to make it possible. But if you're talking about your pricing strategy or recruiting strategy or processes or your branding or your place list distribution or any of those other parts of the business, it's most of the language says, oh, you either have to know how to do it or we're not going to do it.
That is such a bold idea, to be able to take time out of kind of our regularly scheduled meetings, on a consistent basis. So there's the repetition, the safety that comes with knowing that it's a regular habitual behavior for us as a team to explore these and analyze these kinds of, crazy, new, different ideas. And I think that it creates a kind of psychological safety to be able to go there, where people are not going to be necessarily looked down upon or looked as the crazy ones for coming up with a crazy idea, but rather it's invited, it's welcomed. And it also builds the culture of innovation, because you're actually putting resources, right, along with kind of this intention of being more innovative. You're actually doing something about it. And of course, we know that it doesn't end there at a meeting like that where people share the ideas, right? More resources need to be given to explore further, analyze further, determine whether it is a feasible risk to take or not. And that can be very challenging for some companies where resources are more limited, people are overwhelmed as it is, and it might get kind of lower down on the priority totem pole, totem pole, excuse me. So what I guess what can you say to those leaders listening that are like thinking this is a great idea, but my hands are tied. It's I have very limited resources to be able to innovate.
Yeah, what, like, three things I would say to that. One is, don't try to solve the whole problem at once. You break it down into things that have to be true. For this idea to be a good idea, there's like 10 things that have to be true. And then you focus on the things that are easiest to analyze at the lowest cost and the most quickly. Because if you start with the most expensive, difficult one, you might spend a lot of resources in testing that out. And then you get to the end, like when Apple created the first computer mouse, it got the technology from Xerox, but that technology was actually built on lasers. Right now we have lasers on our mice, but it was too expensive to build a consumer product with lasers. So they want to do a trackball. And there are all these things that had to be true if this was going to work, right? They had to actually know that it could technically work. We could send the signals to the computer and make the mouse move. We'd have to know that app developers would develop applications that would use this. This is before you had like that kind of user interface. But also you had to know that people wouldn't mind moving around something that rolled. So of all those three things, and there were more, what would be the cheapest to test? I mean, obviously, don't go to app developers and ask the developers, and don't try to figure out the technology, but see if people would even be willing to move this thing around. So they go to a pharmacy and they get a roller stick of deodorant, and then they use that roller ball to put it into a box, and they get 5 people in and just move it around and see. And that is something that you could do that's inexpensive, right? When Lee Iacocca, when he was the CEO of Chrysler, his team proposed that they could release a convertible version of one of their cars, the Sebring, and they wanted to invest millions of dollars in doing a market assessment. Would people want a convertible version? And he said, how about before we do that, let's just take a car, let's cut off the roof, and let's drive around and like see if people could try it. So you can strategically identify the thing that must be true and do an inexpensive experiment. A lot of our members like this idea, of our clients like this idea from Michael Schraga. He coined the term of a 5-5-5 experiment. Give 5 people 5 weeks, $5,000, 1 or 2 days a week, and let them run an experiment, So, so the two things, those are two of the things. One was identify the cheapest thing, and the other was design a frugal experiment. But the third thing I'll say is that like the cost of experimenting is coming down rapidly because of adoptions of digital technologies. You don't have to go find 5 people off the street and bring them in to like try the mouse. You can actually do it through Zoom, right? You can create digital doubles. You can create a fake website. And then, you, for $250, you can go to, what's it called? A Survey Monkey, and they will go and survey 300 people for you, so it is so much less expensive to try things, to test things out now than before.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful that you shared those ideas, and it's a reminder that new, different, innovative does not need to be overwhelming or necessarily expensive or necessarily risky, very risky.
Yeah.
And it is a matter of taking a few moments to really, or some time to really kind of sit down and prioritize, as you said. And, what do we need to prove that is true, at a minimum for this to work and to take the next step on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, another way to think about it is there's this framework in one of the books that I wrote that was actually my favorite book that I've written, and the least sold.
Oh.
And it takes this Chinese framework, the Wuxing cycle, which if people are like know something about, at all familiar with Chinese medicine, I'm not, then you would recognize it: metal, water, wood, fire, earth. And you could apply that to an idea or an innovation. Metal is the point that you're stuck and you realize you're stuck and you stop doing stuff. So just stop doing stuff that's not working for you, right? And stop selling products that aren't really worth selling. right? Practices. Water is what we're talking about here. Is water is kind of the creating of ideas, possibilities, but you don't know if they're going to work. You're going to act on them, but you need to be able to dream, right? So you have to have these ideas that they start loosening up the water, the metal, right? And now we have this mushy kind of body of ideas that we don't know, we can't get our hands around them. But then we find a few that after we've tested, it looks like they could work. And then they go to wood. And the nature of wood is like watching a tree grow. You can't see the tree growing, but you know it's growing. And so like your innovation, you're putting a lot of energy into it, a lot of time and love, and you're not seeing results. You're not seeing new customers yet. The revenue isn't growing yet, right? But you are building potential energy in wood. And if you have the persistence to get through wood, then you'll get to fire, which is breakout, when things really take off and that tree lights on fire and you release all that energy that you put in, that you created when you created the potential energy. And earth is the consolidation. Is okay, I have figured out this product that I've developed through wood that now is scaled, it now is established, and now you know how things work. You actually need fewer fourth options at that point because you know how to distribute it, you know how to run customer service, you know what the pricing is and all of that. And then, of course, that product reaches its life cycle and it becomes metal again. You want to get rid of it and start anew, So I think that like if your company does not have projects, ideas on all 5 of those, then you're not balanced. And what we're talking about here is a situation where there's not enough water. And when there's not enough water, eventually all your products are going to catch fire and you're going to consolidate them and you won't have anything left in the pipeline. And eventually your growth is going to decline and stagnate.
Yeah. What a really cool metaphor. And I really appreciate, like, even just as a starting point, is a choice to detach, right, from like attachments, right, things that have worked for us, these kind of metals, that sometimes even just going kind of to that next step, being able to say, I'm willing to let this go, it can be hard when people have an emotional attachment to those ideas.
Yes.
It's personal. And so having the courage to be able to acknowledge this is metal, right? It's time to let this go is huge. And it requires some amount of faith and belief, in the sense that, or trust, you could say, right? Because you don't yet have that thing that, is fire ready and so on. So to be able to let go of something that's in your hand, it might not really be serving you that well anymore, but it's in your hand, right? To be able to invest resources into things that you don't yet know if you can hold them in your hand just yet, or if somebody's going to buy them from you. It requires a certain level of resilience and courage and boldness.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. And and faith, and maybe that comes from experience. Maybe I'm just thinking this out loud, but there's, the phrase, there's a bird in the hand is worth more than 2 in the bush. One colleague that I work with, he encourages to say, no, that's right. That works. Sorry. Let me repeat that. So bird in the hand is worth more than 2 in the bush. So maybe a bird in the hand is worth more than 2 in the bush, but like a bird in the hand maybe is not worth as much as a whole flock of birds in the bush. And so if you have a lot of possibilities, then you feel maybe more confident that there's some jewels in there,
I love that. And that trust, comes from listening to case studies like the ones that you do a lot of work, you and your team, researching and seeing that other people were able to do that.
Yes.
Learning from other people's lessons of what worked and didn't work, and I think that also inspires innovation, inspires us to be willing to consider a fourth option, to wake up from our trance, and take that risk or make that shift, which people may not accept. Even our own teams may not accept a new approach to doing things. And again, it kind of goes to this place of, if I am not the initiator of that change or that change process, then, what can I do, right? I being a manager, or a leader who's not necessarily at the top of the chain, so to speak, what else can they do to inspire others to be willing to adapt the culture, to adapt the way things are done?
Yeah. So, in my most recent book, what I show is that 70% of society's most transformative innovations have come from employees working in established companies. Although most of the hero stories that we tell are from entrepreneurs, and I'm an entrepreneur and I love entrepreneurs. If you backtrack and you look at who invented the internet, who invented the mobile phone, who advanced solar energy, who invented the MRIs or DNA sequencing, all of those are employees, So I think the first thing is to recognize that, hey, it's not easy, but being an entrepreneur is not easy either. That you are the primary innovator in society, and society needs your innovation. The big challenge is usually managing the politics. There are 7 different challenges, but the big one my research shows is that the difference between successful internal innovators and frustrated ones is successful internal innovators view the political challenge, or we could say the human challenge, as part of the problem-solving process. So your innovation should be a social construction that becomes true when other people are enrolled in that being true. When you say, this smartphone is going to be a great device, it's not a great device until you enroll other people in that it is going to be a great device, right? Steve Jobs was known to have a reality distortion field around him. He said that the iPhone is going to change the world, and it changed the world because he convinced people that it changed the world, right? So, all of the NLP techniques and principles play a really critical role in that, because you create the idea as water. For it to go into wood, you have to enroll other people in it. So I think embracing that is the first step, and then you learn it.
Yeah, that's super cool. Embracing it, to some degree, expecting it, because it's, as you said, it's a human thing, right?
Yeah.
Humans, as grand as an idea may be, naturally are, at least for a little while, going to resist it because they don't have that programming yet. It's new. The body may not like, something that's not familiar because it's not safe.
Yes.
So when we, as you said, kind of bring that into the process, as part of what we need to innovate, how can we influence others to be open to this, to be willing to play with it, to experiment with it? That's a huge part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the first step would be just recognizing that, hey, it's worth figuring it out. Because here's the thing about innovating in a competitive environment, and most companies exist in competitive environments, is for your idea to be ideally your idea is one that your market loves, but your competitors don't want to copy or resist. They won't copy or resist you for one of 4 reasons. Either they haven't conceived of the idea, they haven't considered it, but most likely it's they've conceived and considered it, but they haven't chosen it. And then ultimately they can't do it anymore because you've done it for so long. Like Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. He knew that his enemy, which was colonial Britain, was going to try to stop him from his vision was, you're going to leave India, right? But he knew if he adopted a strategy that they knew how to react to, they knew how to use guns. They had guns. So he had to use a strategy that they would ignore and laugh at first, right? And so really he's talking about disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation theory, the reason that your competitors ignore and laugh at you is because they think that your product is inferior and the customer that you're trying to sell it to is not valuable. So they're just laughing at you. Oh, you've got a terrible product and we don't care about those customers anyway, and that's what begins the disruption, if you will. And the real challenge from doing it inside is the reason that your competitors will not copy is because it's inconsistent with something they believe, which you talked about before. And you and the people that you work with probably hold a similar belief structure to your competitors. So if your competitors are going to say this is inconsistent with my belief, it's likely the people around you are going to see yourself as my belief. And so it will seem impossible. So when you hear people say, like they said to Walt Disney, They fired him from a newspaper for lacking creativity. Thomas Edison thought that the phonograph wasn't going to go anywhere. When Warner Brothers the head of Warner Brothers, it was proposed to him that they should launch the first talking movie, his team, he said, "Who the hell wants to hear actors talk?" That reaction is both the sign that it's a terrible idea, but it's also the only sign that potentially it's a fourth option. So if we can like start reprogramming so that we react to that reaction as a motivation instead of something to run away from, I think then that's the first door opening to get us to like want to untangle the human side.
That is so super cool. And I love the examples. And I guess the I, right, in Ideas Imagine, it's almost that question of like, what if people would want to listen to actors talk? What if, right? Because there isn't yet the evidence in the world that proves that that could be possible or desired. But just what if, it invites us to imagine, it invites us to consider the impossible.
Right. And I love that you said that there isn't the evidence, because that's fundamentally what the issue is. That is when you are creating things that have already been created, the parts of which have already been created, you can find the evidence out in the world and you can piece it together and say, well, this is true and that is true and that is true. So therefore these three things are true. But when you're truly creating new, the evidence doesn't exist. I think it was the CEO of Netflix who said, you could do a financial projection for a new product, but if that product never exists, you don't know how users are going to react to it. So your financial projection is just made up. You don't know, is the adoption rate going to be 5% or 50% or 90%? You actually have to put it out in the world and then see, and you have to create that data.
Yeah. And as you said, these days, it's so much easier to be able to create that data at a smaller scale, which again it allows us a little more momentum to invest more, right? And make it a bigger scale if it's going to get us the results that we want.
Yes. And I think when you create that data, which you could say is evidence, you have a belief. Like, this is what I've learned a lot from you. You have a belief. You find evidence that it's true, find evidence it's not true. And as you start finding evidence it's not true, then you loosen up the belief and you have a new belief. And then after that, you start realizing that there are things that you believe because you don't have evidence to disprove them. And then you say, but wait a second, there was something else I believed and it turned out to be true. So maybe this would be turned out to be true. And if you do that at an organizational level, then you start unlocking these flows of ideas that come from things that initially we don't have evidence for, but we kind of reprogram the organization or the organism to say, hey, just because we don't have evidence doesn't mean it won't work. So let's go and see if we can create the evidence.
Yeah. And it kind of speaks to this, belief that many people have that I need to see it to believe it, right? Those financial projections that you spoke of, right? It's like, I need to have some real data evidence to be able to know that it works. When actually it's more like when I believe it, I see it.
Tell me more.
So if I can imagine it enough and imagine possibilities and be able then to perceive opportunities that may align with that. So in the context of innovation, let's say it's a product, right? Or even the example we talked about, speaking actors. Yes. So if that hasn't been done yet, right? I don't have anything to see to believe that it's going to work.
Yep.
But the way that the brain works is that if I can create that sense of inner belief, inner certainty is another way to say it, an expectation that it will work, then my unconscious mind will help me to perceive either some data that may be out there that was not quite visible to me before, or give me some guidance as to how I can get that data to help myself and others to believe it some more. And so I'm of the belief that it really does start with mindset when it comes to innovation. And then, of course, that requires some resilience because it is going to be an uphill battle, so to speak, at the beginning, when we don't have that evidence for ourselves or others, and our own body may want to resist it. And so we need to build that resilience to be able to build that mindset that will then allow us to access the evidence or the strategies that will get us the evidence or enough evidence to take the next step in that ideas process, right? To eventually bring it to fire and then, of course, to the earth to be more integrated.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me of this study that I came across for one of the books I wrote, and it was a academic in the UK, and he asked people, "Are you feel yourself lucky or unlucky?" And he took the lucky people and the unlucky people, separated them, and he gave them the same assignment, which was to look at a newspaper and count the number of photos in the newspaper. And the unlucky people took on average like 7 minutes to count them up, and the lucky people usually figured out within seconds. And you want to know, like, why is that? And it was because on the second page of the newspaper, there was a print advertisement, not a photo, that said there are whatever 63 photos in this newspaper. You can stop counting. And so the lucky people like walk in, they're like, oh, maybe I will find something. So it's like what you're saying. It's that you don't even. It's not like you see it and then you think, oh, it's not going to work. It is. You don't even see it. If you don't have the lucky mindset or the possibility mindset or whatever you want to call that.
That's right, because it might not be safe for us to be able to do that. So when you look at Steve Jobs, for example, he believed in these possibilities, right? And so he was able to also like project that belief, radiate that belief to all the non-believers, right? And in doing so, influence them to challenge the status quo and to be willing to explore some potential fourth, fifth, sixth, and onwards options. And so, I'm so grateful to you, Kaihan, for everything that you've shared with us today, because you've truly given us those underlying principles of change, of innovation, and how to go about it, right? So even if we just remember some of the key nuggets, right, like the ideas, right, that acronym and kind of the process, and just remind ourselves that it is a process, and it's important to have some ideas in every one of those buckets, as you said, so that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket, right? So to speak.
Right.
And of course, to be able to create a space where it's safe for others to do that too, because we're better together, right?
Yes.
Bring people in a coherent environment, and right, so many more bold, crazy, not so crazy, right? Ideas can be, explored. And
yes. Yeah. I think humans have not maybe created anything of significance other than collectively. So I think that's exactly right.
Well, thank you for helping us again today to collectively come together, right, in this virtual world. Whoever is listening to this, whenever they're listening to this, you have given them a wonderful gift today. And my sense and my hope is that they will be willing to suspend some of their disbelief in their own abilities to innovate, or their company's or team's ability to innovate, so that they can allow themselves that way to innovation.
Awesome.
And then, of course, our world will be a much better place when that happens.
Yeah, well, I so love your podcast and learned so much. So thanks for the opportunity to participate.
My pleasure. So how can people learn more about your research, your books, your keynote presentations, your incredible groups that you run?
Yeah, I think probably 3 ways. One would be LinkedIn is easy, and then you can message me there and I post everything there. My speaker website is my first name.net, KAIHAN.net. And then our company name is Outthinker, so outthinker.com. Those would be the 3 ways.
Well, thank you again. And, I wish for you to continue to innovate and continue to contribute as you've done for us today. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you, Vered.